Kia ora koutou. Nau mai, haere mai. Welcome everybody to this afternoon's session 2 of the hearings for submissions for the annual plan. I'm Councillor Pat Hancock. I'm chairing this session throughout. The meeting is actually being recorded and is available on the Council's website. It's also being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. In terms of health and safety, if there is an emergency, the emergency exits are actually shown in the building. If we have to evacuate, we go to the assembly area, which is the clock tower in Te Marae or Hene in the square. Health and safety, smoking is prohibited within any council public entrance or building or site. A defibrillator is located in the front of house on the ground floor, just below us here. And please report any near miss or incidents to the committee administrator. In the event of an emergency, the administrators will provide support for people in the chamber. While Palmerston North is at COVID-19 protection framework orange setting, we're asking everybody to continue to follow public hygiene measures. All online participants are to keep their cameras turned on and microphones muted unless they're addressing the meeting. And we have several councillors today who are actually joining us online. Councillors in person to select the option on the voting device if they actually want to ask a question, comment or comment. So that takes us through all of the sort of hygiene matters. We've got a number of submitters here in person this afternoon, so welcome along. We're very pleased to have you here with us today. So what I'll do is I'll just take apologies at the commencement here, and we have no apologies, so there's no need to deal with that. I'm not advised of any additional items for this afternoon's session. Are there any declarations of interest for noting, please? No declarations, thank you. And we have a resolution to note the procedure sheet, and that is the committee resolved to note the procedure sheet for hearing of submissions as described in the procedure sheet, which is provided at the desk here and also has been pre-circulated. Okay. So we will take a vote by hands, please. I'll just wait for the screen to come up. Yep. The screen has arrived and gone. So all those in favour, raise your hands. Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Right, that brings us to our first submitter. And we have got Lindsey Gray, submission number 61. Lindsey, I think you're familiar with the City Council, so I ask you to come forward to the submitter's position here, please. So, Lindsey, you have a 10-minute slot, and over here on my right there is a traffic light system there. At amber, I think it's about 3 minutes. When it gets to red, you've got 1 minute to go. If you really would like the opportunity for councillors to ask some questions, perhaps just leave a little bit of time at the end, and I'm sure that councillors will ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak to my submission. I'd like just to make 2 points regarding my submission as it impacts on my rates personally on the property that I own. And I've been in this property for 20 years. I'd also like to, as a second point, raise the issue of the impact of capital spending on ratepayers. So regarding the first point, I noticed that my individual rates will go up by 10.3%. And of course, initially I thought I was hard done by looking at a 10.3% rate increase, only to find from other submitters and some articles in the media that some individual ratepayers are looking at 20 to 30% rate increase this year, which is exceptional or extreme, it would seem. I'll have a comment about what I would suggest could be done in that space at the end. The second thing I looked at was the movement of rates on my property over 19 or 20 years. And I note that my rates have increased 2.8 times or 280% over 20 years. But looking at the CPI, the Consumers Price Index over the same period, that has increased by 140% or 1.4 times. So what we have over a long period of time on my property is a rates increase that is twice the rate of the CPI or inflation or whatever the measurement may be. This sort of leads into a second point. What drives that sort of increase, where rates increase at twice the rate of the CPI? And unknowingly, I've found an article, or unexpectedly, an article in the Guardian on April the 7th, and it's an opinion piece by one Grant Smith, which I take it as the same Grant Smith that is sitting here. And I'm sure the Mayor didn't actually choose the heading, but the heading is City Wrestling with Operating Costs. And I had to read the article twice to find where any reference was to the article to operating costs. And there's a sentence in there about operating costs, operating costs spiral rapidly upwards. And that leads me into the point that I'd like to make. One of the reasons why rates do increase, I feel, is because of operating costs. That's one reason why the rates are increasing at twice the rate of inflation. Particularly regards to capital new spends or capital new projects. Not only do ratepayers pay off the money borrowed to build or construct, install new assets, they're also faced with the ongoing operation and maintenance costs of those assets. In my time in the council working in asset data, became aware of an asset management principle that not everyone is aware of, and that is that it costs 3 to 6 times the capital cost of an asset to operate and maintain it over its lifetime. So for every dollar borrowed to construct a new asset, $3 to $6 is spent over the lifetime of that asset to operate and maintain it. It's quite variable. Lives of assets could vary from 5 years to 150 years, and the 3 to 6 times is obviously is also a variable. I would like to suggest to councillors that it's important going forward, if it doesn't already happen, that councillors be very aware of the ongoing cost of capital new, because it's not just the cost of the money borrowed to purchase or construct. It's the cost to operate and maintain that asset over its lifetime. I know that in the past there has been a temptation on occasions to reduce or have council officers reduce their operating budgets. But this really is not a good idea from an asset management point of view, because assets do need to be maintained and operated properly. If not, there's the risk, of course, that they could fail earlier or need more maintenance cost in the long term. And of course, if that happens, it's an additional cost to ratepayers down the track. So briefly, I would like to suggest two things from my submission. One would be that with the hugely variable increase in individual rates, that perhaps the council seriously consider capping rates increases to 8.3% for any individual ratepayer. Now, of course, the difficulty with that is it will reduce the overall rate take, and there'd be less rates coming in. But as a suggestion, I think that it is worth councillors giving that some thought, particularly when some individual ratepayers are facing extreme or excessive rate increases this time round. And I do wonder, in a different tone, whether the council could, through the local government, local body organisation that all councils are part of, to lobby government, central government, long, hard and loud, to have the GST on rates returned to councils. This would help a lot to mitigate the increasing cost of rates in the way that I've spoken with regards operating and maintenance costs. So I think I'm just up to the orange lights. So that really is all I'd like to say to speak to my submission. If there are any questions, I dare say you'll fire them at me.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsey. We do have a question from Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Lindsey, for your submission, and certainly the comments you're making around capital, our consideration of our capital programs. I'm just wondering, do you have any specific suggestions of capital programs that we could pull back on?
Short answer, no. I didn't look into the detail of individual capital new. I dare say that the reality is the more new stuff council builds, the more the operating costs are passed on. But sorry, no specifics.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the submission. I just wondered if there was a chance to expand on your concept of GST being returned to councils and how that might work and the benefit that could bring.
Oh, I think in my own notes suggested that perhaps it could help with infrastructure costs, because many assets are running towards the end of their life, or it could go towards keeping operational and maintenance budgets up to the level they need to be to maintain those assets, perhaps those two areas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you, Lindsey. We don't have any further questions for you, but thank you very much for your submission this afternoon, and that will form part of the deliberations of Council in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, councillors.
Right, our next submitter is Nick Dow from the Disability Reference Group. Nick, if you just want to come forward to the hot seat. And also note that Nick has got support here with him as well. If you would like to come forward with Nick, if that would be helpful.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mayor, esteemed councillors and members of the public, thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Nick Dow. I am the chairperson of the Council's Disability Reference Group. It's my understanding that the councillors here today have my submission in front of them, so I won't repeat it, but I will attempt to summarise it. The impetus for the submission, it started in November 2020 when the DRG made a submission to the long-term plan. The submission was around an assessment of the accessibility of council infrastructure. And as a result of that submission, the council resolved to go forward with that program to assess council infrastructure for its accessibility and to identify any gaps. The main purpose of that was to have an overall view of the situation rather than having individual issues come to the council on a regular basis. So as a result of that resolution, there was a program in the 2021-22 budget, program number 2041, accessibility assessment for $100,000. It is the group's understanding that the money for that program went towards an assessment of council-owned buildings against the building code. And I made my submission to the 22-23 budget simply because I didn't see anything in the draft towards that program. So basically, I would be looking for sufficient funding for a continuation of that program, and also preferably an expansion of its scope, both in terms of what is assessed and how it is assessed. The group would be looking for a more general assessment of infrastructure, things like disability car parking, pedestrian crossings, footpaths, etc., etc., and also a more of an accessibility-focused lens on the assessment, more than the building code can provide. There are accessibility standards that it can be assessed against. But the key point I wanted to make on that is how such an assessment could lead to work which would lead to a greater quality of life for our disabled people. So that's basically me. Does the room have any questions for either myself or for Hugh next to me, who is a fellow member of our group?
Yeah, Councillor Harpeter. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Nick.
Oh, right, sorry, hello.
Just a question around, have you discussed this submission with officers and got any feedback from officers on what you're looking for?
Yes, in fact, just this morning, Sarah Sinclair got back to me with a rundown of what's going on at the moment. The specific financials are a little unclear at this early stage, but I just wanted to make sure that there was some accessibility funding budgeted for the coming year.
So she gave you an indication that there was some financials in the budget?
More that the council officers are currently in discussion with an accessibility auditor, and they gave us some idea of the sort of funding we'd be looking at. I think the potential figure that Sarah gave was around $250,000 to $300,000 in addition to the 100K that was already put through this year.
So you're looking for around about that figure?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. That just gives us an indication because we didn't have that in your submission, so that gives us an indication. Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Nick, for your submission and coming in to speak to it and being available for questions. I'm just wondering whether, when the initial programme was put through council last year, whether the scope at that time reflected the request of the Disability Reference Group and that has subsequently expanded, or is it more that there was a misunderstanding about the scope and it's only lately that you've discovered that it doesn't encompass everything that you expected?
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I think the latter is the case. I think there was a misunderstanding amongst council officers in terms of what we were asking. We were asking for a more general accessibility audit. However, the 100K that was put forward in 21-22 simply covered council-owned buildings assessed to the building code, and the properties team have come back to the DRG and said that they would require more funding for an increase in scope.
Right, okay, thank you. That's what I needed to establish. So very helpful, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Nick, for your presentation. A couple questions, if I might. One is to understand, perhaps just by way of example, some of the differences that would be offered if we were to take the approach of the New Zealand standard. What would that be meaning practically in terms of the quality of experience in life that people living with disability would experience in the city if we could get to that standard?
To be honest with you, Councillor Barrett, the expertise in that area was with a previous member of the DRG who has unfortunately just recently moved beyond the council boundaries, so can no longer be a part of our group. I haven't looked into the standard specifically, but I do know that it exists, and I think in my initial submission I gave the number of the standard.
You did, thank you, yes. No, that's all right, thank you for that. The second question that I had was around your encouragement for us to do more work in the transport space, I suppose, in terms of disability and access. If we were to prioritize activity within the transport network, recognizing that it's quite a complex beast, where would the Disability Reference Group most like to see the initial work and initial focus done?
Hugh, perhaps I could throw this one to you. Would that be okay?
Thanks, Councillor. I'm not sure if I can specifically answer that question on behalf of the group. Transport is a very broad area, and I think we'd need to evaluate that in specific detail, which is an exercise that we've yet to do. So. Myself, I'm not a regular user of public transport and don't have a great deal of personal experience or any personal views about it.
That's all right. Thank you.
But I think more generally, Councillor Barrett, we would envisage something of a workshop session between the DRG and the properties team in terms of what we would be seeking and also what would be realistic in terms of the funding and the manpower required.
Great. Thank you both, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just talking about the audit and auditing buildings and council buildings, etc. Several years ago, for the DPA, the council had a contract with DPA to do that work in and around the city. I remember Shane Goodrich was the chap that was doing it. Now, one of the things that he found was that the ATMs were too high for people in wheelchairs, and he managed to get those changed. Now, we're talking about having somebody within council or somebody doing audits around the city. My question to you both, actually, Hugh as well, do you think the person who's doing the audit should have some life experience with disability, or do you not think it makes a difference?
Thank you, Councillor Finlay. My understanding is that the audit would be done by an external party who was recommended to me by another member of the DRG. So my hope would be that they would indeed have some lived experience, or at least someone in their organisation who does.
Thank you.
To add to that, Councillor Finlay, as far as I understand it, the organisation that has been selected to carry out the audit was involved in the drafting of the New Zealand Standard 4121/2001. So that's a long time ago, but there's a connection there between the current audit organisation, a charitable trust which was involved in the drafting of those standards. So maybe there's some sort of assistance. In terms of the constitution of that trust, I'm familiar with personally one of the individuals involved as suffering from a high level disability, which is extremely limiting in terms of that person's mobility. He's I'm not a local person, and I don't know if he's personally involved in the audit, I presume not, but he's a trustee of that organisation.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Right, thank you. Mr Mayor, you were in the queue. Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes the questions to you both. Thank you, Nick and Hugh, for coming in this afternoon. Your comments and obviously your submission will be considered as part of the wider deliberation process. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you, councillors.
Right, thank you. Our next submitter is Te Hauhine Ahuone, which is the Palmerston North Women's Health Collective, Jean Hera. And Jean, you've been here many times before, so I probably don't need to explain too much in terms of how we conduct this, so in your own time. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Always good to have this opportunity to have input. Just speaking very briefly today to our short submission this year, really want to emphasise some of the areas that we see as most important. And housing would be one of our big ones, and we feel quite proud of our council, of the good work that's been done in social housing. So just really want to encourage that. It's a huge issue for women's health, for low income health, and it's such a difficult time for people with housing at the moment, so anything council can do to help is so important. Also want to support the important work as Te Tiriti o Waitangi partner and the work with Mana Whenua, and look forward to the Māori wards developments. Really want to emphasise environmental aspects of the eco-city work. It's huge. Addressing climate change is huge, and I think we are beginning to see, more and more people are beginning to see this, and really want to urge council to do more. Also support the public health initiatives, and once again housing's part of that. Water quality, water safety, sunshade, all those things are hugely important. The biggest debate we had as a collective was around some of the new items, and the free rubbish bag trial. We actually raised this issue quite a few years ago, that for people on low incomes, affording rubbish bags is huge, and you know there's been a lot of dumping of rubbish and people burying it and all sorts of things. But we also debated that actually using plastic bags for the rubbish isn't great, because it's more rubbish really. And so there was discussion about what New Plymouth were doing, and they have a whole range of recycling bins, including for recycling glass, rubbish, compost, food scraps, and that was seen as a popular option, which I guess would be quite costly for council to do, but would like you to consider that in terms of the future. And I guess lastly, I'd just like to support the important COVID Community Relief Fund that the City Council has provided to community groups, and we're one of the beneficiaries, and that was really important, and would like to support that for the future for other groups who need that still. Yeah, so that's me.
Thank you, Jean. Right, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. Thank you for your submission, Jean. And I did just want to pick up on that last point that you made, because in your written submission, you'd said that you supported the continuation of the Community Relief Fund for COVID, but you hadn't explained why. And you said a little bit about it just. I wondered if you would like to explain to us what difference being able to access that fund has meant to your organisation.
Yep. We applied for laptops to be able to work from home. You know, we had our computers at work, and we had one old laptop. But that need to be able to work from home when lockdowns happen, when people have to isolate, all those sorts of things. And just, I guess, we've got a new worker now and she's got young children, and so it's more difficult. You know, you've got to manage illness more for children. So all those sorts of things have been really important in terms of having that resource. So, yeah, it's been really important for us. And all the Zoom meetings, actually. Can Zoom on them, not on your old
I'm here on
computers.
A laptop. I totally understand.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Jean.
Great, thank you, Jean. I don't see any more questions in the... Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. I do have one more question in the queue. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, it's a bit tricky trying to manage people in two places at once. Thank you, Jean, for your submission and your comments. Very helpful. I just wondered if you could expand. In the last paragraph of your submission, you put about supporting work for food resilience development, and you mentioned edible planting, but do you have other ideas of areas of work around food resilience that you'd like to see council assisting with?
Well, it's not an area of great expertise for me, but we do link into the food action networks. I think, you know, we are always great supporters of healthy food, and we have a pātaka kai based at the centre and want to see lots of healthy food in that. So I guess we just generally support all the planting and the gardens, and yeah, I guess everything that can be done to be a more environmental city and provide more food, because when people on low incomes, you know, it's housing and food are real essentials, but they're not necessarily a need that's properly met. And that's a big issue at the moment, with huge rental costs and rising cost of living and difficulties with transport. And of course, public transport is huge too, which I didn't talk about. But yeah, I just think all those areas is something that council's really got to put more and more effort into, and it has to, you know, and nationally we have to put more effort into. I don't know whether that's answered your question, Lorna.
No, it is helpful. So for you, it's more about access to being able to grow healthy food, whether that be in a community garden or access to fruit trees in parks or whatever, but it's more around the fresh fruit and vegetable access.
Well, it is food in general.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, when people haven't got money, they're hungry, and, you know, basic food is really important. And a great work is being done in terms of, you know, the different organisations. And yeah, it's great to see the different food sharing initiatives. It'd be good for council to, you know, support that in general.
Yeah, it's a developing area, certainly. Thank you, Jane. That's very helpful.
Thank you, Jean. That concludes the questions. Thank you very much for your submission. Right, the next submitter is actually online, and that's Environment Network Manawa 2, and it's Helen King. Helen, I think you're familiar with the 10-minute time allotment, so in your own time, you may commence. If you could just turn your microphone on.
I think it's on.
Yes, it is now.
Kia ora.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today. And I'm going to be very, very short and sweet. And I'll just talk briefly to our submission, which you obviously all have in front of you and hopefully read. So I don't need to reverse that too much. As you can probably see from our submission, E&M is generally very supportive of many of the elements that Council has included in here that link to our environment, to transport, to sustainability, to resource recovery and to grants. There's always more to do, but for our year budget, there was much there that we felt very supportive with. For those of you who aren't familiar with Environment Network Manawa 2, we are the environment hub for the region, and we support and underpin and promote the work of 60 member groups who are linked to the environment and to sustainability initiatives. And our submissions are done in collaboration with our membership who work with us on these as well. We also oversee a couple of collectives, the Manawatu Food Action Network and also Source to Sea. And the Manawatu Food Action Network, as part of E&M, has also submitted a submission, which they will talk to on Thursday, which links a little bit to what Jean was saying as well, around the possibility of adding a budget line to develop a citywide food resilience policy, which they will talk to in detail on Thursday. The only real couple of things I wanted to raise from our submission, just for a little bit more thought and conversation, was a note that was made about having a little bit more clarity on naming our reserves around the city and the historical context that they have as well. What we believe is that if people have that historical context and they understand a little bit more about the reserve and where it came from and the people associated with it, there might be more respect and buy-in to that reserve and more care of it as well, which ensures that our green spaces stay beautiful for all of us to enjoy. The other thing I just wanted to raise that was in the submission was just linking to new urban growth, that there should be some space factored in for local reserves or contribution towards them. These reserves in these new areas are still important, and this green space is important as well for people to enjoy and benefit from in their neighbourhoods. That is pretty much all from us. Thank you very much for the opportunity to submit. It is always important to us to be involved in these conversations. And before we made this submission, it was brought to our attention, and I think rightly so, that though this is an opportunity as well to express any concerns, this is a great opportunity when we talk to you to express some solidarity and support for some of the things you're doing as well. And we are very grateful for some of the developments that are happening in this annual plan. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. I'm just opening up for questions now, and we've got a question from Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Helen. I just wanted to expand on your discussion about naming the reserves and just understand a little bit what you were alluding to. So if you could just expand on that a little bit more.
Thank you. This is what my understanding is of this. This was a submission that was written jointly, so this is what my understanding was. I know a lot of the reserves are named, but my understanding is that there's not necessarily a history connected to them or to the people. For example, the Opie Reserve or the Linklater Reserve, there is a little bit of history there that we can understand, but just a little bit more detail about not just the name of the reserve, but why it's named, who it's named for, and what the significance is of it, in the hope that if people read that, they might go, this is an important place, this is a place to be respected and to be enjoyed.
So something like a storyboard at each of the reserves,
yes.
Something like that.
That would be wonderful, yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that knits together the beautiful story of our city as well, not just our green spaces.
Thank you for that. That's a great clarification. Thank you, Helen.
No worries.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Helen, for speaking to Environment Network Manawatu's submission. I had a question around the first bullet point under the submission heading within your submission, which makes reference to the Better Off funding, the $8 million earmarked around Better Off funding. And it speaks there about a view that E&M has that it would align well with optimizing resource recovery opportunities. I was just interested to understand if you're aware, or if you can share with us, how E&M got to that point of view?
I have to be honest with you and say I cannot talk very well to that point, and that's something I'd have to go away and find out a little bit more about for you, and I do apologise for that.
That's all right. I was just quite interested in how that view had been formed, but we can follow that up through other channels, I'm sure. Thank you for the submission. Much appreciated.
For that. Thank you.
Great, Helen, thank you very much for your submission. That concludes the questions. So again, thanks for participating, and that'll go forward with the rest of the information for deliberation, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we only have one more submitter, whose timing is 4:30, so what we'll do is we'll actually take a 20-minute break and be back here in the chamber at 4:30, and hopefully our last submitter will be here to talk to us. Thank you. Right, thank you everybody for coming back. So we've got Mr. Richard Bedford is our next submitter, submission number 310. So Richard, if you'd just like to come to the submitter's desk, and when you're ready, you can start.
Thank you.
And we just talked about 10 minutes and allow time for questions if you need to. The traffic light system on the right-hand side of me here, that will show amber at about 3 minutes and red with 1 minute to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So to start, just press, it's already on. Thank you. Appreciate your help. Well, good afternoon all, and thanks for taking the time to hear a submission from me about the proposed rates increase in particular.
Sorry, Richard, can you just pull the mic a little bit closer to you so that...
Well, I'm sorry, is that better?
That's great, thank you.
You're welcome. So thank you all for taking the time to hear a submission from me about the rates increase that's proposed. I know that it's quite a controversial topic and that you've received a number of sometimes quite fiery submissions, so I've seen some of that reading a bit of what's been put on your website. So I plan to keep a little more temperate than that. And I know you have a difficult job to do and books to balance, as do ratepayers, I suppose. My submission effectively is really about how we gauge fairness, I suppose, because I know that that is stated to be a goal, and in doing so, I thought I would just perhaps do best by trying to create something of a comparison between what I'd be looking at paying at a rate of by way of increase and what others might. And I know that rates is not something that can be precisely set in terms of gauging fairness, but I printed a series of just a single page for each of you, if I could perhaps pass them left and right. Would that be all right? I hope there'll be enough. Thank you. I have a couple more here. I can send further out left and right. There are 3 more. There we are. Okay. Thank you. If there aren't enough to go all the way along, there are enough. Thank you. So, folks, what this represents effectively is at the top of the page is my own property, and that I have.
Sorry, Richard, can you just pull that mic a little bit closer to you, please?
Oh, well,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Yeah, we've just got people online that are obviously listening in as well, so
thank you. So the top of the page is my own property, the address of which I've left blank because I'm not on the roll, and just for the privacy of my family, I keep it so. But I am very much in that neighbourhood of the next property down, which is listed there as 304 College Street. So those folk are very nearby, and you'll see that the land area between the two properties is in fact identical. There is a slight discrepancy in the current CV there, but the rates bills, when one looks at what was and what is, they were previously paying greater rates than I was, and their rates will increase as well, but theirs will increase to the tune of $560. Mine by a little under $1,500, which I hope most people would agree is a fairly significant rates increase. $1,500 from a rates bill of what was $3,680, which I take to be around about a 40%, approximately 40% rate increase. And I know that figures have been talked about of rates increases generally in the region of perhaps up to 10%, but from what I'm reading online, I'm seeing that there are quite a lot of people in the 20 plus, and I think I'm even at the higher end there with 40% rate increases is a massive increase. I hope all would agree. Then running down the other comparison figures, there are other properties in the area as well, and with similar land areas, and they seem to be rated at a land value of far less than mine, which again I struggle to understand. A property a few doors along, for example, has a land value of now $770. Mine's put at $935, so I'm having some difficulty understanding why the size of the land is exactly the same, and yet I'm being, I suppose, rated or taxed on an estimated value of a good, well over 150,000, or about 150,000 more, it would seem. So again, there's a sort of discrepancy there that in terms of fairness I find hard to gauge. Running further down, two more comparisons, folk up on Summer Hill. We have a $2 million property with a land area of 2.5 times the size of mine, which has a rates decrease proposed of almost $400. Again, a person with $2 million in a property getting a rates reduction in terms of fairness seems hard to understand. And similarly for the next one down, also on the Strand there, a decrease of $666.60. So folk that are in more expensive properties seem to be getting decreases in value, where despite large land holdings, they're both over double the size of mine, and yet I'm paying 40% more. I note the folk on Elmira Ave there too. Again, surprisingly, two of the three that I've listed are receiving rates decreases, one of $733 on a property value not greatly dissimilar to my own, and with a land area a little larger. So I think the figures really just speak for themselves, and in terms of having a fairness debate, that is what I'm asking a recalibration for in relation to. Perhaps there might be an expectation that everybody will pay something more and some people will not have to pay 40% more. Thank you, and those are my submissions, unless you have any questions.
Great, thanks, Richard. We do have some questions here for you. The first one is Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Richard. That's really stark, the way that you've been able to present that, so thank you. In your written submission, in the bottom paragraph, you've talked about that we should not take on future projects that we can't afford, e.g. redevelopments of the square, the library, etc.
Yes.
And I appreciate that you've given some specific examples there. Do you have any other specific suggestions of areas that we could pull back on in terms of what's in our draft plan?
Well, it's a difficult one because I love reading, I enjoy books, I like the library, and I think the square's a credit to the city. It's a great attribute that we have, and I'm proud of it. I suppose I would like to see the money go into those things, but the difficulty is at the expense of a 40% rate increase right now in these times, it's I'm not against paying more, not at all, and I'm not against those things, but I'm just the scale of what's proposed, the way that it affects me personally. I acknowledge that property values have gone up, for example, but we read in today's paper that they've slipped back about 5% here, and whilst the figures look good in terms of property owners making great gains, the difficulty is getting someone to actually pay that. It may appear like that, but to find someone to pay it, and also having equity in an asset like that doesn't necessarily mean people have the cash flow to afford the increases.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well chaired too, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for your submission. Look, you're probably aware we don't set these revaluations. They're done by an independent former government agency, actually, QV. And look, I thank you for these, the spreadsheet, and I'd have to say that the figures are quite bizarre in the sense of how unevenly they fall, so I don't have any issues with you complaining strongly against it. Did you question, because I mean the two top ones there where you say almost identical property land areas,
Yes.
and actually the valuations aren't massively out of kilter either, but the increases are just massively different. Did you question your valuation when you got it?
I didn't. I didn't worry too much about it. I took it with a grain of salt, to be honest, and I thought, well, what does it really matter? What a thing is worth is what a willing buyer and a willing seller are prepared to agree on, and that's really a valuation. So to me, it's somewhat arbitrary, and so I didn't bother to question it. Perhaps I should have, but that was really my thinking.
Yeah, okay. Look, thank you, and thank you for showing us the unevenness. I mean, we do know, we're reading all the submissions, and your story is common. Thank you.
I understand that there's yet to be a final sign-off on the structure of things, and so I'm hoping that the submissions mean that final decisions haven't been made, and that the final decisions haven't been made, and that the submissions can make a difference.
Thank you. Just before I go to Councillor Johnson online, I've just got a very brief question, Richard, if you don't mind. Just in terms of identifying the properties that you've included to the spreadsheet.
Yes.
Were they random or?
They were quite random, yes. I just got and I have the supporting property information I had taken off in case more detail were needed about them, but basically just looked on the Palmerston North City Council Government NZ rates building information and just printed them off. So quite randomly, just checking through and seeing for comparison in my own neighbourhood, and then in other neighbourhoods such as Hokowhitu or across the bridge and things.
No, great, thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Richard, for your submission.
Pleasure.
And I have considerable sympathy, and I'm in a similar situation to you myself, let me assure you, personally, in terms of my rates increase. But I've got a couple of questions. One is, I just wanted to test what your understanding is of our ability as council to modify how we charge rates based on valuations. So, for example, you've suggested a price, a 10% increase cap. Is it your understanding that we have the capability to that? Because some of the advice that I've had is that we don't have that capability.
I suppose I just make the assumption that the council will have control of its own affairs in terms of what it can do and what it can't do, because somebody must come up with these figures. So I see you as at the top of the tree, and you're hearing the submissions, and there must be a point to that. So I don't think it makes sense in a logical way for there to be a submissions hearing if there's no ability to change anything.
No, there is obviously ability to change some things, but there are some things that are not within our ability to change, is my understanding, and that's the price cap is one of them. The other thing I just wanted to comment on is in terms of the effect of the link, I suppose, between valuation changes and the percentage increase proposed by council. So, you know, the majority of your submission has been around the quite significant inconsistencies that the revaluation has thrown up.
Yes.
But at the same time, then you've talked about council monitoring its reducing its own spending. But there isn't actually a link between the valuations and what we spend. So the fact that you're slated to pay 40% more doesn't mean that council gets more money in total as a result of the valuations. So I just wondered if you were clear that there wasn't a link there between valuation changes and the total amount that council collects in rates?
Well, I suppose what I had read was that the aim of this was fairness. And so I go back to looking at a property very nearby mine that's exactly the same size and with a similar value, some slightly less, I have to say. But the thing is that they were paying more rates than me, and now their increase will take them to $4,335, whereas mine will go to $5,141. And so their increase will be $560, but mine will be $1,460. And so it seems to me not rocket science that whoever's responsible for the decisions, however it's worked out, and it's the council that I'm paying this to, and the council that is mooting these new rates for me, it doesn't seem fair and it doesn't seem logical. I should also say I'm not intending that the council spend less. I think you had made that comment, but my submission was that it shouldn't spend more on projects that don't have to be, particularly if I'm going to be paying 40% more in rates. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it's a difficult environment to be really clear about where we have control and where we don't. So I'm hearing what you're saying, and I also am understanding that you're hoping that we've got some power to change things. So thank you for that submission.
Is there a question involved in this?
No, I was just responding to the submitter's question to me, if I had understood his answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Thank you very much, Richard. That concludes the questions. Thank you very much for your submission and also taking the time to come in here and actually spend some time talking to councillors and being available to answer questions. And I think probably, if I can comment, the spreadsheet that you've provided us really certainly provides some clarity around those disparities. So thank you.
My pleasure, and thank you for the work you all do.
Right, councillors and Mr Mayor and council officers, that's the end of our session. So we're actually going to adjourn to 7 p.m. This evening, and that session will be session 3, and that will be chaired by Councillor Butt. So I'd just like to thank councillors for your attendance, and also council officers, and also submitters for coming in and spending time with us this evening. So what we've learned this evening, we will consider in due course with deliberation. So thanks again, and we're adjourned now till 7 p.m. Councillor Butt, it's all yours.